When Allen Ginsberg belted the raging words and rhythms of his poem Howl in 1955, a generation with a new beat took hold. For 5 decades, he has been the poet laureate of protest and the heir apparent to William Blake and Walt Whitman. In fact, the last time he was on this show was to talk about Walt Whitman. Also an essayist and pacifist, Allen Ginsberg continues at the forefront of the American social debate. A Guggenheim Fellow and recipient of the National Book Award for Poetry, he is at 67 still performing before sellout crowds of all ages. A new documentary, The Life and Times of Allen Ginsberg, celebrates a poet and the work, and I'm pleased to have him here this evening. Welcome.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think of this new film?
Well, it's family-oriented.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, actually, my own family takes part.
Your supplementary family is...
Yeah, my stepmother is actually the narrator as much as anybody, and she's pretty intelligent, so I like that part.
Yeah.
I think it's a little over-dependent on 60s stars like Joan Baez and Abby Hoffman.
Yeah.
Maybe could use a little more literary background, because my life is literary mostly. Like, there isn't much of Gary Snyder. I mean, I wish he were in it more. Some of Burroughs, but that's there. Gregory Corso is in it. That's a good thing, because he's very charismatic in any
Well,
moment.
what's extraordinary is the amount, I think I mentioned this earlier, the amount of footage that evidently was there, and the amount of things that were on tape, whether it was from your appearances at different events and television shows during the, I mean, it begins with sort of what Bill Buckley and Dick Cavett, sort of appearances on those shows.
It goes all the way back to the 60s and 70s. Yeah. Well, when Jerry Aronson proposed making
this is the
film,
producer.
Yeah. He proposed making it back in 82 at Naropa Institute, where we have this Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, where there was a Kerouac conference.
Right.
He started filming people, and I said, okay, I'd cooperate if he would get together all the public footage possible. That is, all the news footage from Granada Television in England and NBC or wherever here, or Channel 13, and then at least he'd have a basis for a Lifetime documentary. So he did that, and then he interspersed it with a lot of new stuff from Boulder, Naropa, or with interviews with Burroughs.
But it's your life. And in the end, when you look at that, what do you, I mean, you're happy with it, and you think it's a reflection of who you are and what you're about?
An aspect, you know, like I'm also like very overtly a homosexual.
Yes.
Or gay.
Yes.
That isn't very much emphasized there.
Now, why is that? Because Peter did not want to...
No, I think that's more the timidity of the industry, we might say.
Oh, really? It was a worry about the reception on the
part
part
of... No, if you get it over heavy on that, you know, maybe... Then there's the aspect, I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and there's very little of that in Eastern Europe. Like I've just been in Serbia, and all over Europe, and given readings in Belgrade, breaking the cultural blockade, which is a great mistake. You know, there is a cultural blockade as part of the general blockade of Serbia.
Meaning what?
Well, you can't get information from the outside, because the West, as part of its blockade, has made a cultural blockade. So the people there are. The government has a one-channel brainwash propaganda television which keeps everybody in hypnotic thrall. And you can't get outside news. You can't get the International Tribune or the New York Times or Le Monde. But as part of official policy.
Yeah, but okay, but on
American policy.
American
and UN policy. Yeah, they've made a big mistake.
You're saying the Americans do not want the people of Serbia to read?
It's part of the blockade. Remember, there's a big blockade. That's part of it.
Yeah.
A huge mistake, which the Americans haven't even noticed.
Yeah.
I was there. So they kept telling me in Belgrade, in Serbia, please ask Bob Dylan to come. Ask as many writers and rock bands to come.
These are the literary and intellectuals of Serbia?
The majority of Serbians in the big cities are against the war. Yeah.
And against Milosevic, I presume.
And against Milosevic, because Milosevic has control of the one-channel television that covers the countryside, but there's some alternative within the big cities. And so there's opposition, and a majority have voted against the government. But we haven't taken care of that. So what's needed is a cultural blitzkrieg, if anything.
Does Allen Ginsberg, pacifist he is, believe that what's needed is to meet military force with military force to stop the Serbs in terms of the massacres that are taking place, and in terms of the bombardment of Sarajevo, and in terms of the genocide?
I had a conversation with President Havel of Czechoslovakia, in which I suggested...
fellow poet.
Yeah, whom I've known since '65. And I suggested a cultural blitzkrieg, since everybody else was in a stasis, They don't know what to do. They weren't wanting to do military, and I'm a pacifist anyway.
Right.
But one thing we could do and could have done all along and still can do is a cultural blitzkrieg. Information, an information channel open to Serbian citizens, particularly in the countryside, with whatever technology we can mobilize. Havel's idea was that it would work. It might take too long. It
And
worked.
too many people would die in the meantime.
It took 20 years, he said, in Czechoslovakia, but it succeeded. But we haven't even tried that as at least one step as a beginning.
And it probably succeeded because of external forces, too, by eliminating the Soviet will to stay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But does it cause you, and I want you, you got a poem there, which I want you to read.
Well, why don't I read it?
Oh, but one more question about this. Does it does the atrocities of genocide cause you to rethink your pacifism at all, or do you still firmly hold to the belief of
No,
pacifism?
it's not pacifism so much as, you know, I am not going to go there to fight myself, so I wouldn't send anybody else and urge anybody else to go there and fight and get killed. I wouldn't suggest to anybody to do what I myself will not do, or am not doing. At least I'm modest enough to know that. You know, not telling them, yeah, you go over there and get your head blown off, helping them out. Right. But one thing I can say is willing to break the cultural blockade and go in there.
Yeah, you are willing to go in there yourself to break the cultural blockade and come back.
Yeah.
Would you read the poem that you
I
have?
had
This
an
is called
idea.
Peace in Bosnia, or is it?
Peace in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I had an idea just in the middle of the night.
Recently?
Yeah. It's General Mother Teresa, speaking of pacifists.
Yes.
General Mother Teresa, Emperor Dalai Lama XIV, Chief of Staff Monk Thich Nhat Hanh, Army Chaplain Jr. John Paul II, followed by the shades of Gandhi, Sakharov, Sartre, and his uncle Albert Schweitzer, went to the bombed-out streets, talked to Muslim Bosnians in the burnt-out grocery stores, parleyed with Croatian and Serbian generals in parliament, asked them to quit shooting and firing artillery from the mountainside overlooking villages emptied of grandmothers. So now there was quiet. A few fires smoldered in back alleys. A few corpses stank in wet fields. But who owns these houses? The cinema theaters with broken doors? Who owns that grocery store, that city hall, that windowless school with broken roof tiles? Who owns these little apartments? Now all worshippers of Allah pray in towns besieged 100 miles away, overcrowded in tenements and tents, with UN Porto Sands at the crossroads? Who owns these abandoned alleys and drugstores with shattered bottle shards over the sidewalk and inside the door? Who'll be the judge, attorney, file legal briefs, bankruptcy papers, affidavits of ownership, deeds, old tax receipts? Who'll counsel who lives where in the rubble? Who'll sleep in what broken-walled hut in the full moonlight when spring clouds pass over the face of the man in the moon at the end of May?
Good. Tell me the processes. I mean, you woke up in the middle of the night to actually...
I had this funny idea. Yeah, what if there were peace?
Yeah.
You know, then how are they ever going to clean it up? You know, the disorder that's been created by the Serbians and by Muslims who have blood on their hands, and the Croatians, all of them have blood on their hands. The greater karmic weight probably on the Serbians for starting it. But who's ever going to disentangle all the confusion, rubble that's been created by the war? You know, they destroyed law, they destroyed families, they destroyed communities. How is it ever going to get put together again, even if there were peace?
Mm-hmm. Let me turn and talk about generations. Yeah. I mean, you're 67 now, and when was Howl was first published in what? Was it 55 or 56 or 57? It was 56. Yeah.
Written 55, published 56. Censored by the customs and local vice police. Children's vice police.
Yeah, why was it? Why was
I don't know. One of these
judge somewhere got
vice cops that didn't have anything to do came into City Lights and bought a copy and then busted Ferlinghetti, the poet, owner of City Lights in San Francisco, the publisher, and the clerk, Shig Morao, who hadn't read the book, and then put him on trial. And the judge won. The judge said, "Okay, it's not obscene." Yeah. And the decision was interesting because it heralded the beginning of the end of censorship of literary works, because in that decision the judge said that social commentary of intelligent social commentary, or just social commentary, and aesthetic power or beauty were legal defenses against the charge of obscenity. Before that, you couldn't get a book off on that. You know, before that, it was, if it had dirty words, that's it. Just like it is now on TV, by the way, you know.
Yeah.
Jesse Helms put in a law directing the FCC to censor all, was it, not obscene, but bad language on TV between 24 hours a day. And that's been fought down the line.
Well, hasn't Howard Stern, the radio...
He gets fined.
He gets fined for
but
using...
somebody who wants to broadcast Howl,
right,
which is being read in the afternoon in schools, in anthologies.
But if you put it on in certain
hours, put it out
hours...
at the same hours and on the air, then you could get busted. Yes. So Pacifica, which used to broadcast it, no longer can, and it can't be on television. And once they get this giant Viacom Paramount merger where one person controls the entire information network, then I'm off in this so-called free market of ideas, in the main market of ideas, and I'm bricked off the scene between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. To defend the ears of minors from bad language, presumably, or what Jesse Helms thinks is bad language.
What do you think of the 90s? Does the 90s have any stirrings of a previous decade in the same way that, you know, David Halberstam in his book about the 50s pretty much says that the 60s came about because of forces that were at work in the late 50s?
Well, poetry in 60s, 50s, and 90s is a unique...
50s, 60s, and 90s. Forget 70s and 80s.
Well, yeah, 70s and 80s were dominated by homogenized mechanical lying all over, well, both in media and in the government.
Homogenized lying.
Yeah.
So what about the poetry of the 90s?
I think what's happened is that in the 90s there's a huge resurgence of poetry readings and a revival of Beat Generation literature.
Yeah.
And I think that's because there's the unique individual voice, authentic, as distinct from the canned voice of media and the lying voice of government.
The canned voice of media and the lying voice of government.
I mean, I can't read the poem you're talking about. I can't read this.
You can't read Howl because it'll be violating whatever.
Well, it'll be violating the neo-fundamentalist idea, what their idea of, you know, like what's proper for people to hear.
Yeah. What restrictions would you put on what you could say over the airwaves?
I don't know, but I wouldn't put a restriction that would...
no, I know you wouldn't do this. I understand that.
That would damn poetry.
Yeah, right. But I mean, would any kind of speech that you would want to... I mean, whether suppose it was anti-Semitic, as you know, the accusations against this.
I would just let the normal laws apply, and this new law is abnormal. It's right-wing Jesse Helms. It's actually alcohol and cigarette money, which funds the Heritage Foundation.
Right, alcohol and cigarette money funds. I mean, that's the only source of their funds.
Well, Coors Beer funds Heritage Foundation, which formed this law, and gave the legal language and the apologia which Helms put into the congressional record. And cigarette money is what he's the lobbyist, this congressional senatorial lobbyist for North Carolina cigarettes. Gets his money. So it's alcohol and cigarettes posing as the moral, authentic arbiter of what the kids in America can hear.
Well, let me just point out. Let me leave North Carolina there for 1 second. You know, as you know, that's my home state. It is that same. I mean, that money also forms a lot of people. That the money from the primary economic interest, as whether it's oil in Texas or tobacco in North Carolina. In North Carolina, you know, one of the largest banks in the world is headquartered in North Carolina. That money also funds other political candidates who have far different views than Jesse Helms does. As you know, former governor and president of Duke, Terry Sanford, was a senator and received some backing from some of the same people.
However, the cigarette companies or the tobacco companies do fund him. And for him to be posing as a moral arbiter of the state seems to be ridiculous.
I agree. Let me raise one last question with you.
But I don't know how to answer your question. What should be censored?
Yeah.
So just simple as that. I don't know how to answer that question. But I know what they are censoring is wrong.
I got less than 30 seconds. Of the things that you have done in this really wonderful life that spanned 67 years, what are you most proud of? Can you tell me in a word? Just being there and being a voice for...
No, writing poetry.
That's what I mean, being a voice.
Being an artist.
That's what I mean, giving a voice to...
Not a voice to others, but giving a voice to my own private thoughts.
That's what I mean, yeah.
It's the role of poet, I think, is to say what he thinks whether it's right or wrong, if it passes through my head, then that's what I can represent as truth.
Your
it is
truth and
true
your
that I
art.
thought this.
Yes.
Whether it's true or not what I thought is
Thank
true
you.
I thought it.
Allen Ginsberg.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Toodaloo.
Great to have you. Thank you for joining us this time. Look forward to seeing you next time. Until then.